Federal agencies are still learning how badly the SolarWinds breach has impacted them. C4ISRnet reports Navy Chief Information Officer Aaron Weiss says the breach has the Defense Department's full attention. Danelle Barrett is former Deputy CIO of the Navy and former Director of the current operations at U.S. Cyber Command. Thanks for joining me. What's the implication here for learning how far the bad guys have gotten into DoD systems?
Yeah, I think that the piece about the detect is still a struggle for everybody, both within DoD and commercial industry. People are trying to determine how far this adversary actually burrowed into the network, because it's not just the SolarWinds compromise itself, the initial compromise of the software that provides infrastructure updates to networks, for example. It's once they got in, did they escalate privileges? Did they install other backdoors or trapdoors? Did they change logs or change data? And that would be, there's some insidious things there that could have been done. While it looks like sort of an espionage campaign right now, there's just no full understanding yet of what was impacted. And I think that's, across all agencies, anybody who was using this software or who had systems connected to networks using this software. Because remember, if your system was connected to a network that was affected, you could be affected as well, depending upon the permissions across those networks.
Is that potentially the biggest danger here, Admiral, that we don't know what we don't know because we're still trying to figure out forensically what was connected to what and who had this running where?
Yeah, I think that's always the biggest concern from a cyber defender point of view, is what actually happened and then what happened to the data. I mean, these guys, this was a pretty sophisticated attack. I mean, they used block lists to make sure that forensics things couldn't be done. They installed teardrop backdoors and things like that. They to avoid having logs to affect what was logged and what could be looked at. They installed some tools that red team folks use. So they were pretty sophisticated and not just throwing a little tool out there. I mean, they had a kind of a well thought out plan about how they were going to, once they were in, use those other advantages they have to branch out. And that's the hard part, because, if you can start altering logs or avoiding detection in other ways, then it makes it really, really hard for defenders, even with the best tools, to see what they've done. And the important part on any network is to understand what's normal. So what is your normal state of affairs? If you've got a really good network, you've got a really, really good understanding of your network, then you can see, with the help of more advanced tools and AI and things, anomalies that are just above the waterline, right? If you don't have good tools, now you're in a real hurt locker, because you can't even identify now what's been compromised. And the insidious part about that could be, it's not like they're going to exfiltrate, say, something big, large and loud, 8 gigabits of data or something. What's more insidious is if they go in and change some of your data. Now you are making a bad decision, either from a military standpoint or a corporate standpoint, on information you believe to be valid and true and have confidence in. But should you? And, it kind of brings up the story to me. I don't know if you remember back in 1983, Stanislav Petrov, the lieutenant colonel who avoided World War III, because he was sitting in his command center that day and he saw an incoming ICBM missile from the United States, followed immediately by 5 more. And he didn't trust the data he was seeing. He said, that is not any scenario I've ever been trained on. That is not anything that I've ever seen in any of our doctrine or tactics, techniques, and procedures. So he didn't do what he was supposed to do, which was, launch a nuclear weapon back. I mean, there's no dipping your toe in the nuclear weapon game, right? And so he waited 28 minutes, which was what impact would have been, and it didn't happen. And thank God he did. But are we smart enough today to question the data that we see on our operational and business systems to say, okay, has that data been changed? Are those data right? And how do we do that when we have so much data now? So protecting our data at that lowest layer is becoming increasingly important, wherever it is, whether it's in the cloud or in a standalone premise system or something like that. That's why the zero trust architecture that NIST is putting out, and they put out the SP 800-207 in August, and DISA is working on their version for the, relying on that for the DoD, for example. But that zero trust architecture, where you don't implicitly trust any asset or user based on a location or something else, but that you're using really strong authentication, really strong authorization, and really strong identity management throughout. to make sure that data are protected at that lowest layer.
Admiral, we just have a minute or so left, but I think of all of the things that you said there, what was most troubling to me was the level of sophistication here implies a strategic plan on the part of the adversary that's the same as warfare. And it strikes me that that's the way if we're not already thinking about our cyber defenses that way, we need to start. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, they're attributing this. Secretary of State Pompeo attributed it to APT 29, which is Cozy Bear Russia. And we've known for a long time Russia, China, Iran. There's many countries who are after us from a cybersecurity, a cyber offensive posture. And I think as a nation, we also need to establish some cyber red lines. I mean, we have nuclear red lines, we have Geneva Convention warfare red lines, but our cyber red lines are a little squishy still. And what constitutes an act of war, and what constitutes that if, for example, they attack critical infrastructure, which is privately owned. So a lot of work still needs to be done by the Biden administration coming in. I think they recognize that on, how do we define cyber warfare?
Danelle, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you here.